A clay tablet once recorded something almost mundane. Jars of a fermented grain drink, listed right beside grain, oil, and bread. It was a ration record, the kind ancient administrators used to track what workers were given. In more than one ancient economy, a fermented drink shows up right there, next to the food. Now imagine one plausible human moment sitting behind that record. A laborer receiving an allocated jar before heading out to work. A modern viewer sees that scene and thinks one thing immediately. That's beer, and that's breakfast before a shift. Lean in closer, though, and the jar stops looking so familiar. The liquid inside might be cloudy instead of clear. It might be thick, with grain still suspended inside it. It might have sediment settled at the bottom, almost like unfiltered soup. It might be eaten as much as it was drunk, spooned up beside a meal. It might not resemble any bottle you'd recognize from a store shelf. The ancient payroll system may have required more jars than signatures. But before the jokes, two questions are worth asking here. Does a beer line item in a ration record prove that person drank it every day? And if they did drink it, does that prove they got drunk? This video isn't here to just retell the history of alcohol. It's here to test what the evidence can and cannot prove. Before asking what the drink did to the worker, we need to ask what the record proves. The question isn't really whether that jar contained alcohol. Ethanol shows up in a surprisingly wide range of ancient and modern liquids alike. The question is what that single fact tells us. Line up four things side by side for a moment. A jar of fermented grain mash, a cup of ancient beer, a bowl of ritual wine, a modern glass of distilled spirit. All four of these can technically contain ethanol, but it contains ethanol doesn't automatically reveal the concentration. It doesn't reveal the portion size someone received. It doesn't reveal how fast that person drank it. It doesn't reveal how many calories came along with it. It doesn't reveal the setting, the company, or the purpose behind it. And it definitely doesn't reveal whether anyone ended up intoxicated. To untangle this, it helps to run every claim through three filters. First, what evidence do we have? Second, what was in the cup? Third, what did people do with it? Underneath those filters sit three layers that get blurred together constantly. Availability means a drink existed and could be reached by someone. Allocation means a drink was distributed, recorded, or formally rationed. Consumption means one individual drank some amount at some frequency. Here's the key catch worth remembering through this whole video. A record showing distribution is not a camera showing someone drinking. So what kinds of evidence survive? And what can each kind tell us? 4 especially useful kinds of evidence survive from the ancient world, and each one has real limits. Start with residue analysis, the chemical traces left behind inside old containers. Residue can show a vessel once held a particular substance, processed from certain plants. It can show chemical signatures consistent with fermentation having occurred. Residue cannot identify the drinker, the portion, the frequency, or whether anyone felt intoxicated. What it does preserve is a material trace of deliberate processing and possible fermentation. Then there are brewing tools and installations, from grinding stones to fermentation vats. These can reveal that production was deliberate, not accidental, and hint at its scale. But they can't reveal how the finished drink was distributed, or how much one person received. A third source comes from administrative ration records, the tablets ancient bureaucracies kept. These can show a fermented drink was formally distributed and treated as an economic resource. What they cannot prove is that the recipient drank the whole portion, alone, in one sitting. They cannot tell us anything reliable about the drink's strength. The fourth source is religious texts, images, and literature describing drinking and its effects. These can show a drink carried cultural weight, and that intoxication was a recognized state. They can show a society had norms and expectations around drinking behavior. What they cannot become is a statistics report on an entire population's daily habits. 3 ideas are worth locking in right here. Before we go any further, allocation is not consumption. Consumption is not intoxication. And a surviving record is not a census of everyday behavior. The evidence can show that fermented drinks existed and moved through society. To understand what they did to people, we still need to know what was in the cup. Fermentation itself isn't a human invention. Yeast can turn natural sugars into ethanol without any human help at all. Wild fruit left sitting in the heat can ferment entirely on its own. Humans didn't create that chemistry. They learned to notice it, repeat it, and shape it into practice. Once people were deliberately producing fermented drinks, the results varied enormously. Some batches turned out thin and watery, others thick enough to chew, almost like a porridge. Some were nearly clear, others stayed cloudy, full of floating grain or fruit pulp. They could be made from barley, wheat, fruit, honey, or some combination of whatever was on hand. Many were calorie-dense, closer to a meal than a simple beverage, often eaten alongside food. Some were diluted with water before anyone drank them. Batches could differ wildly depending on the season, the grain, or the brewer. And in some cases, a batch could be strong enough to genuinely intoxicate someone. It's tempting to flatten all of this into one simple image, but that would be a mistake. Not every ancient fermented drink was weak, or basically liquid bread. Not every ancient fermented drink was automatically safer than water, or counted purely as food. Compare that spectrum to a modern can of beer or glass of wine. Many modern commercial drinks are standardized, with a fairly predictable concentration from batch to batch. A labeled serving is easy to measure, and many products remain stable for months. They can also be consumed quickly, in a controlled, familiar dose. Ancient fermented products rarely offered that kind of consistency. They varied batch to batch, often mixed with solids, often tied closely to food. Many needed to be used fairly soon after they were made, and were shared from one container. What ethanol does to a person depends on several things happening at once: the dose, the speed of drinking, the body involved, the food in the stomach, and the length of the session. Some ancient drinks may have looked less like something you order in a glass, and more like something you negotiate with a spoon. Once the drink stops looking like a modern beer, the next question changes entirely. What job was the drink doing? One striking early example comes from Rakafet Cave, used by Natufian communities. Inside, archaeologists found stone mortars bearing traces of plant processing. Some of that residue has been interpreted by researchers as consistent with early malting or fermentation. The cave itself was tied to burials, gatherings connected to the dead, and the living community around them. That context raises a real possibility worth sitting with. A fermented drink may have been prepared for a communal or ceremonial occasion. It's worth separating exactly what we have here into three honest categories: the evidence, stone tools, plant residue, and a documented archaeological context. The plausible interpretation: a fermented drink may have been deliberately prepared for a shared, meaningful event. Producing it would likely have required planning, labor, and time. The unknowns, the exact recipe, the strength of the drink, how many people drank it, and how often this happened. We also don't know whether anyone became intoxicated during any of it. None of that is fully recoverable from stone and residue alone. Still, the underlying question is worth asking. Why would a community set aside grain, water, tools, and time for a process like this? Possible reasons include funerary rites, remembrance, seasonal gatherings, hosting guests, or marking significant events together. This isn't proof that alcohol invented religion. It isn't proof that a fermented drink created community out of nothing. And it isn't proof that this was humanity's very first encounter with ethanol. What it does suggest is narrower and honestly more interesting than that. Fermentation had become socially meaningful. A cup prepared for an occasion like this could carry memory, obligation, and belonging, not just ethanol. For the people gathered there, whom they remembered may have mattered more than how strongly the drink affected them. A drink used for one occasional gathering is a meaningful thing on its own. A drink recorded, produced, and distributed by an organized society is something else entirely. In Mesopotamia, fermented grain drinks show up again and again in administrative records. Temple and palace archives list them alongside grain, oil, and bread as resources worth tracking. Production could involve dedicated storehouses, organized labor, and institutional oversight. Turning grain into a fermented drink served a practical purpose. It turned grain into a prepared food and drink product that institutions could divide into portions and distribute. It could deliver calories to people doing hard physical labor. It could function as part of someone's compensation, alongside grain and other goods. At the very same time, it could carry ritual weight or signal a person's status within that system. Egypt shows a broadly similar pattern, with fermented drinks appearing in temple offerings and worker provisions alike. Here's the important catch, and it's worth repeating clearly. A line on a ration tablet is not a camera trained on the person who received it. Several very different amounts get blurred together if we're not careful here. The amount officially allocated to a person, the amount they actually went and collected, the amount they shared with family or coworkers, the amount they personally consumed themselves, and the amount consumed at any single sitting. These are not the same number, even though ancient records mostly only give us the first one. A few claims need to be resisted at this point. Don't call the entire ration a modern salary. Ancient compensation rarely worked like a fixed wage. Don't treat any specific volume as a universal fact unless it's been verified for that exact context. Don't assume a large volume automatically means the drinker ended up intoxicated. Don't assume every laborer received the same drink at the same strength. And don't assume this fermented drink simply replaced water entirely either. What we can say with more confidence is that the drink entered the machinery of society. It became part of how these societies processed harvests and distributed goods. It helped organize labor, mark obligations, and link economic life to ritual life. The ancient accounting system may have tracked jars more carefully than it ever tracked hangovers. This makes regular access to fermented drinks entirely plausible for many people. But one popular explanation makes the story far simpler than the evidence allows. You've probably heard some version of this claim before. Ancient people drank beer because water was always unsafe to drink. That explanation is too universal to hold up. 3 things are worth knowing here instead. First, ancient people absolutely still drank water, and plenty of it. They found springs, dug wells, built channels, and learned through generations which sources to trust. Second, water quality varied enormously from one place to another. It depended on location, season, population density, and whether the source was a river, a well, or rainfall. It also depended heavily on how waste was being handled nearby. Third, some brewing processes involved heating, which may have reduced certain microbial risks in particular settings. Straining could remove solids and change texture, but it was not the same as sterilization. Low alcohol content did not automatically make every drink safe. Water was not automatically dangerous, either. No single explanation fits every ancient society on Earth. A more accurate way to put it is simpler than the myth. Fermented drinks belong to a much larger food and water system, not a replacement for it. So a fermented drink could be practical, nutritious, and genuinely common. And it could do all of that without replacing water, or making everyone who drank it drunk. So who actually drank regularly and who didn't? Let's answer this by starting with the strongest positive case. In some specific contexts, there is meaningful evidence of frequent use. Rations were distributed on a regular, recorded basis in several ancient economies. Households or production sites operated fermentation routinely, not just occasionally. Fermented drinks show up tied to meals, labor, and ritual across multiple ancient societies. Some groups likely had something close to daily access to these drinks. But zoom out, and ancient humans were never one single group of people. Access and habits varied by region, climate, ingredients, season, class, gender, age, and period. There was no single ancient drinking culture shared by everyone, everywhere, across thousands of years. There's also a gap between allocation and consumption worth remembering. A ration could be shared, traded away, or used in cooking rather than drunk directly. It could be consumed gradually, across several moments, or never finished at all. And its strength could vary considerably from one batch to the next. And even where consumption happened, that still isn't the same as intoxication. Consuming a fermented food or drink is not the same as receiving an intoxicating dose. There is also a wide gap between a mild effect, visible intoxication, and losing control entirely. So, did ancient people get drunk? Yes, they did. They clearly recognized the state of intoxication, and sometimes deliberately sought it out. They also built norms and warnings around drinking too much. One useful example here is the Greek symposium, a structured drinking gathering. Wine was often diluted with water, and roles, order, and behavior were carefully managed by the host. Losing control was treated as something distinct from drinking within the expected ritual. A few cautions matter here, though, before moving on. This doesn't represent all of ancient Greece, or its women, poor, or wider population. And it doesn't mean these rules always worked in practice. What it does show is that intoxication was recognized as a distinct social state requiring rules and boundaries. So here's a fair working answer to hold on to. Some ancient people probably consumed fermented drinks on most days of their lives. But the evidence doesn't justify turning that into one universal ancient habit. And it certainly doesn't prove universal daily drunkenness across the ancient world. The desire for intoxication itself was not new. What changed later was how strong, stable, and quickly consumable the product could become. In many ancient settings, a fermented drink rarely stood alone. It usually sat inside something larger, a meal, a harvest, a ritual, or a workday. It often appeared through hospitality, or a single jar passed between several people. Production itself tended to be slow, and the results varied from batch to batch. Over time, though, techniques changed that picture considerably. Producers gradually became better at controlling fermentation with greater precision. Some drinks became more stable from batch to batch. Improved storage and containers allowed certain products to travel farther without spoiling. Across many markets, strength and serving size became more predictable. Ethanol itself could eventually be concentrated further through distillation. A shared cloudy jar might deliver an uncertain dose over a meal. A measured glass of distilled spirit could deliver far more ethanol in minutes. Distillation itself deserves a careful, cautious mention right here. There's no single day it was invented, and no single inventor to credit for it. It didn't spread to every region at the same pace or the same time. Not every later change in drinking habits came from distillation alone. Trade networks, bottling, standardized measurement, and industrial production all mattered too. Here's the real through line worth remembering. Modern humans didn't invent the desire to get intoxicated. Technology mainly changed how that effect arrived. It became stronger. It became more predictable. It became easier to buy. And it became easier to consume quickly. Put simply, the molecule was familiar. The delivery became more precise. None of this means ancient people drank in some healthier, purer way. It doesn't mean modern alcohol is simply bad by comparison. And it doesn't mean every modern problem with drinking began the moment distillation appeared. Which brings us back to the worker, the record, and the cup we thought we understood. Picture that ration jar again, back in the worker's hand. At first glance, it looked like one simple thing: beer. A drink before work, a shortcut to being drunk on the job. Now that same jar can hold several truths at once. It could be a portion of processed grain, a source of calories, an official ration. It could be something shared among family or co-workers, part of a long-standing tradition. It could be a product that genuinely contained ethanol, and sometimes a way to reach intoxication. But that single jar never automatically proves certain things. It doesn't prove the person drank the entire portion, alone, or in one sitting. It doesn't prove they drank it every single day, or that it was as strong as a modern beer. And it doesn't prove that person ended up drunk. So here's the direct answer to the question this video opened with. Yes, some ancient people may have consumed fermented beverages on most days of their lives. But no, the evidence does not show that all ancient humans drank alcohol every day. And even where daily rations clearly existed, daily access never automatically meant daily consumption or daily drunkenness. There's a deeper answer sitting underneath that one too. Much of what we call ancient alcohol was also food, ration, ritual, and hospitality, often all at once. The same basic substance could nourish someone, bond people together, and mark someone's status. It could express an obligation, create real joy, and yes, cause someone to lose control entirely. What decided the outcome was never just the ethanol molecule itself. It was the entire world surrounding that cup. Who made it? Who distributed it? Who was allowed to drink it? When, with whom, and why? That is why the ancient cup was never simply their version of our modern beer. Behind it could stand a worker, a household, a funeral gathering, or a host welcoming guests. It could be food, pay, ritual, hospitality, and sometimes intoxication, all at once. The ethanol was familiar. The world around the cup was not.